everybody, I'm Tall.
And I'm Small.
And today we're continuing on through the AAMC's official MCAT study guide, where we are going through every single point that they say is going to be on the test so that we are prepared for what is actually going to be on the test. Today we're going through Psych Soc, and Small is going to be teaching us about memory.
I am. And so I'm really excited about this video because it's actually changed how I'm looking at studying for the MCAT.
How so?
I will get to that in just 1 second.
Okay.
The first point I want to make is that we often use memory and learning interchangeably. Mm-hmm. And so learning should be really for the acquisition of behaviors. And we kind of use that as like, oh, I need to learn this set of material. And really we're talking about, I need to commit this set of material to memory. Mm-hmm. I need to memorize. So then I'm working with the accumulation of knowledge and not behavior. So we kind of, in common vernacular, use the two words interchangeably, and in psychology, they are not.
Okay.
So, like I said, memory is how we accumulate knowledge. So how do we do that? The first step of acquiring new knowledge would be to encode the information, so add it to our existing memory. And so the process of encoding information, one would be automatic processing, so something that we don't have to effortfully do. So like we drive the same route to school every day, and there's a new coffee shop on the way, but we don't really think about it. But later on we can remember that there's a new coffee shop, but we didn't have to effortfully add that to our thought of like how we go to school. It just kind of was automatic.
Okay.
Gained without effort.
Right.
And so effortful, controlled processing. Surprise, bet you didn't see that coming right after the one that says without effort. Effortful processing is what you're doing right now, trying to shove new information in your noggins for test day.
Okay.
So if you have to actively focus on, I want to encode this information, you have to put energy in to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So things that used to be effortful can become automatic, like when we first learn to drive a car and we have to focus on like, I got to make sure I'm in the right gear and like my lights are on, and if it's raining that this is happening and I'm not listening to the radio too loud, and eventually it becomes something we can automatically do, and we can automatically react to new information. Mm-hmm. And so yeah. Or like learning a new language. At first you have to translate it to your original language in your head to string together a sentence.
Yes.
And eventually it becomes something you can do without thinking about.
Because you actually recognize the new words.
Yes. It's an automatic thing. I know what this new word means in the language it means, and I know without having to process, without having to put effort in what that means in my language, the message I'm trying to get across. So what I do want to point out here is that when people are studying for a test and maybe they're cramming the night before, which is shown to be like totally ineffective for adding new information to our noggins, and then we go to take the test and we're like, hey brain, what's the answer to this one? And brain's like, I don't know. We looked at it, I recognize it, but I don't know. And we say, oh, I forgot it. Well, most of the time we didn't forget it. We just never actually encoded it. We never put effort into adding something new to our brains.
So that's actually it's a very important topic, especially for studying. Yeah. For something like the MCAT or even in medical school, when you really have to know the stuff. You can't just you have to encode. I'm being really careful with my wording now. You really have to encode it.
So wording is really important in psychology because we have so many words that seem like they might have a similar definition. That's why some of these discrete questions are difficult, because they sound reasonable, right? And if you're not familiar with the phrasing or the terminology, then it could be easy to pick the wrong answer. So when I said that it was changing how I'm studying for the MCAT, it had been a while since I've gone over this stuff, been a while since I've taken a psychology test, class test, that as well. But I'm really focusing on, am I really adding things that I've never heard before to my brain? Am I really encoding them? Because reading them once, like Tal said, in med school, if you read a new bit of information once, that is in no way encoding for most people. Yeah. So we need to, like we've mentioned before, need to read a word and be able to spout off a little 5-minute lecture on that word. And so what I've started doing is I don't even listen to my music in my car anymore. I just teach myself, like I'll teach myself the eye, I'll teach myself the ear, or some new bit of psychology that I learned. Like I really like talking about sleep, giving mini lectures about sleep in my head, because it's something that's really cool and applicable to me because I'm struggling with it right now. Yeah. So anyway, encoding, effortfully rehearsing the information, and I will get there in just 1 second.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different types of encoding. So some people, like maybe you have photographic memory, pretty rare but really useful, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. So for most people that don't have photographic memory, visual encoding is not super effective. It's the weakest form of encoding we have if you visualize the new information. Unless you go over and over and over that visual in your head, you've kind of lost that new thing. Mm-hmm. Acoustic encoding, a little bit stronger. If you so you store the way it sounds. So sometimes I could be on a genetics test, and I had an incredible genetics professor, and I could hear him tell me the right answer because I could hear that part in the lecture that he was explaining how such and such worked.
Yes. This is actually applicable to what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Because I am a very strong auditory learner. I need to talk and teach and listen. I listen to videos and recordings of my professors constantly when I'm in the car. And even if I'm not really paying attention, I listen to something enough times that then when I go back to really try to do something like this, like we've gone through this information. I mean, I've gone through all this information by like reading it aloud to myself or watching Khan Academy videos. I've gone over it maybe 3 times, 4 times, like for each thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't learn it that well. But now that we're talking about it again, I'm remembering everything and I'm doing that hard encoding with the foundation that I laid for it, because I just remember like, oh yeah, I remember hearing that in the Khan video and I remember how the person talked. And so it's also important to know how do you learn.
Exactly. So maybe that could be a weak way of encoding for many people, but maybe that's your strength. Maybe you flourish that way. So yeah, know how you learn and then like go follow after it. And
then make a podcast where you're studying for the MCAT, so it's an excuse to talk.
There you go. So the way I learn best is just reading from my textbook, and so I don't know that that's really visual because I also have to teach myself afterwards, but we know that we learn in different ways, Tal and I. So we came up with the idea of podcasting to get the information out there and make sure we were rehearsing it by practicing it, and making sure we understood it enough to explain it to other people. I think Einstein said that if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough.
Yeah.
So anyway, know how you learn, know your strengths, and then use it to help you encode new information.
Right.
So the strongest way of learning new information would be semantic encoding, so adding some type of meaning behind the new stuff that you're learning, whether that be making a silly story that goes along with like intra-organelle movement in the cell, or maybe a whole bunch about it, so when you add a new fact to that memory, it already intrinsically has meaning.
I used to make jokes sometimes that I would like when I would be listening to my professors on like a recording. I would listen to it maybe 2 or 3 times, and as I started to know exactly what they were going to say next, I was just like wisecracking about their stuff, and it was complete nonsense, gibberish sometimes, but I remembered the little jokes and how they strung together.
Yeah.
Also, Schwann cells are swan cells, and then I wave my arms and know that it's periphery.
Wow.
Silly stuff like that.
I remember that the oligodendrocytes, which have the same function in the CNS, are in the central nervous system because they're the OGs.
Ah.
Yeah.
It's that stupid stuff that we keep on like giving examples of that we haven't exactly said its definition until now, but it's semantics.
Yep.
We're really trying to just like find some obscure reference to something in the world, in your life, in your other memory that helps you remember this new thing. Like I know what a swan looks like. I know a swan has to flap its wings to fly. Therefore, if I move my arms, I'm thinking Schwann cells. Oh, they're in your wings, which is your arms, which is your peripheral nervous system. There.
The sillier, the better.
Yes.
And even if it's inappropriate, like no one is reading your mind as you're taking the MCAT. No one's going to see you have that stupid little grin when you remember the way to think about interference, which we'll get there. Nobody gets super excited. We'll get there.
Toblerone and a pool noodle, people. Listen to our hearing episode.
So here's where I get really excited, because here is what's applicable to us as MCAT students. We've already talked a little bit about it. But a specific type of semantic memory is self-reference effect. So if you can tie something to a semantic thing about yourself, you'll remember it better. So for example, I remember what happens in Parkinson's because I had a grandmother that had it, and so I can tie that to what she was going through. I'm familiar with it. I also remember what neurotransmitter is involved with it. It's dopamine, because my family considered giving my grandma marijuana to help with the appetite problems that came along with being so sick with cancer and Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if you can reference yourself or things that you have experience with, then you can really cement and learn that information better.
Yeah.
So do you have any good examples of that?
For self-reference effect?
Well, every example you tell me about your dad and how you learned things about neurotransmitters.
Yeah, that's actually true. I've spent a lot of time with my father's medical practice and just discussing science with him and the newest stuff coming out that we're learning about clinical treatment science. And yeah, I don't know if that's really self-reference, but it's really just I remember it because I was talking with him. Maybe it is to a certain degree because it makes it more meaningful that it was me talking with my father.
Yeah,
but
you can tie it to something that you have in your past.
Yeah, it's true. Totally true.
I mean, mine's a kind of silly way, like that marijuana is called dope sometimes, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter involved. And, and all that. But the sillier the better, and if you can tie it to yourself, they have shown with these psychology studies that people have done before you that it works better to encode things. Yeah. So take advantage of it. And then maintenance rehearsal is a word that I've said like 18,000 times before I actually defined it for you guys. And rehearsal, I just think it's so cool because if you think about, like, if you're in theater, if you were a dancer, you rehearsed, you practiced something a million bajillion times until you get it perfect, and then on the performance night you did a wonderful job. And rehearsal for your tests is kind of the same thing. We're encoding and going over and over and over a piece of information so frequently that you understand all the ins and outs of it and how you explain it. And what if I change this little part of the question? How would my answer change and all that? So that goes along with that Einstein thing. Like, if you can't explain it simply and, understand how it changes when you change one part of the question stem, then you don't understand it well enough.
And in understanding it well enough, which I think is going to be really powerful with having a teaching, conversational, you can almost just say a more casual way of approaching the studying. Like, we do very intense studying. We spend hours and hours and hours doing this.
Yeah, we've been here for like 8 hours today or
we
something.
have. But it doesn't feel like that.
No, this is very fun.
Because it's fun and it's a conversation and it just, it's what we do. And a lot of other pre-meds can probably relate to this.
Yeah.
And so when you get there on test day, which is just like what it's like if you're a doctor and you're showing up to the emergency room or something. When we get there on test day and we start taking the test, it's not the big bad monster that is the MCAT. It's like, oh, this is just gonna be doing the thing that we do.
We've done this 8 times before. Yeah. And hey, I've really worked on my psych this last month, so I really want to see if I can increase my psych score.
Yeah.
It's
like a competition within yourself.
Yeah, it's just like you said, it's the thing that we do. It's like if we were playing a sport, it's just another game I get to like show off now.
Yeah, like I already have the skills. I know what's going on. Like we know everything that's going to be on this MCAT test. Now we just need to do it again.
Yeah.
It's not like it's this precipice. It's just another thing to do.
Yep, exactly. I like thinking about that. And so I do want to mention very quickly, one of the people that we got the idea to do a podcast from would be Brian Schnedeker from Next Step Test Prep. He runs the MCAT podcast with Dr. Ryan Gray from the med school headquarters. Mm-hmm. And Brian says all the time in the podcast that you need to build in 1 day of review every week. I think that's important to mention for you guys that are spending hours and hours and hours jamming your head full with new information that may or may not get stuck in there the way it's supposed to. So really plan out a schedule and make sure you have at least 1 day to, one, relax a little bit because you're going to survive one way or another. You're going to get where you need to go. And 2, you have to have a review day to rehearse this information or it's all going to go bye-bye.
Yeah, you will not properly encode it. You got to keep up with it.
Yep, we'll get to spacing in a little bit, but that goes along with spacing.
Right.
So we already talked about mnemonics. We have all sorts of silly mnemonics.
Yes.
My favorite one is how I remember the charged amino acids when it comes to pKa's that we need to know.
Yes.
Don't ever help crazy yodelers kick rams.
Don't. That is... D-A-S-P-D? Aspartate?
I think is it asparagine?
Asparagine is N.
Aspartic acid or something?
Aspartic acid might be that. don't ever glutamate, help histidine.
Oh, it is aspartic acid. It's aspartate. Aspartate,
yes.
glutamate.
Aspartate, glutamate, help histidine, crazy.
Yep.
Oh,
C.
Cysteine.
Yep, 9. PK of 9.
And then don't help crazy. Yodelers is tyrosine.
Yep.
Kick is lysine.
Yep.
Rams is arginine.
Yep.
Got it. That took a while.
So yeah, it took me a second too to remember aspartate, and I was like, well, why is it at the beginning of that list? And I was like, oh yeah, one of our carboxylic acids.
Yeah.
So like as long as you, and I've used that for every single MCAT practice problem about amino acids, and it has never led me wrong once. So really find a mnemonic that works for you and stick with it. And maybe, what was first effortful processing turns into automatic, and you just kind of know that histidine has a pKa of 6, or that the D and E, so aspartic acid and glutamate, have one around 4.1 or whatever. Or, you can intrinsically know those, but if you ever have a moment where it like takes you a second to recall the information, we're going to get there in a minute, recall, you can fall back on your mnemonic that is cemented in your crystallized memory.
Yes.
So, moving on, method of loci. So Tal actually taught me about this when we met about a year ago, and he was telling me about different studying strategies for med school, and he was like, some people are really good at using a house.
Yeah.
And do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, it was a trend that was really picking up speed with medical students, that there was a style of learning where you would put together this really weird scenario that would happen in a familiar place, like if you were in your home, you're walking into your home, and then like something outrageous was happening, like to your right or something, and every little bit of that outrageous thing was like a mnemonic kind of to remind you, or it was something to remind you of one part of the thing you're trying to remember.
Yeah.
And then you would move into the next room, and then something else would be happening. It's a thing you have to practice.
Yeah.
But once you get it, it's apparently fantastic.
So my cell biology teacher actually builds in one day for each unit that we do on storytelling, which I think is awesome to have a science teacher that's like, hey, we're going to create a story about how, neurons firing work from neuron to neuron and all the little pieces of it. And so you're right, like it's something that requires effortful processing. You need to practice the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, that method of loci is literally using a locus, a location, to tell a story and tie it to whatever you're trying to learn, which I think is really, really cool. And then peg word system. Now this one is a little weird. It's not something you see super common, but like if you're trying to memorize your grocery list or something, you just hated carrying paper, you were just really particular like that, you would have a set rhyme scheme of like 1 to 10 or however many items you normally needed to memorize at a time. And so like 1 sun, 2 shoe, and they would have a rhyme scheme. And if you memorize that list, you'd memorize it so often that you had it just like it was permanent in your mind. And then you would make up a crazy story to weave into that rhyme. So like 1 sun, I need eggs. So like there's an egg and it's baking on my driveway because it's the summer in the summer sun. And then 2 shoe, I also need chicken breast to make dinner. So my chicken has shoes on after he just laid the eggs. And you just make this really crazy, silly story, but it goes along with the peg word rhyme that you've created in your mind that's like crystallized, and then you can change it however you need to for whatever, and I don't like this one. I've never used this one, but maybe it exists. So maybe
that one actually that one feels right to me. Yeah. At first, I had no idea what you're talking about, but I kind of like it.
It's hard to get a hang of. Yeah. I don't think I would use it because the amount of things that we need to memorize for like the MCAT, like maybe you don't have any background in like someone who's never taken cell bio or someone who is actually a psychology major and doesn't know anything about biochem. Yeah. Like they would have to memorize so many different things that peg word list would get so long. Yeah. I don't know that it would be effective. But maybe for something smaller like a grocery list that would be. So the last one kind of is obvious, like chunking or clustering. If you group together your grocery list into like aisles that you need to go down, so like I'm having a party for my my mom, and so I need to get like margarita mix, and her favorite food is tacos, and blah 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 blah, and a long list of groceries. But you grouped them into like drinks versus napkins and forks and all that, and plates, and then the next one was food, and they were all in the same aisle, and
right.
It would be easier to remember groups of things.
Yeah, remember all the drinks you need, remember all the utensils you need, remember all the food you need, instead of saying I need this just list of random things.
Yep, exactly. So that was a really long explanation about encoding and different ways to encode and all that. But keep in mind that first step of learning something, I used it wrong.
Of encoding something, committing it to memory.
Oh, memorizing something. I made the fatal flaw. I made the fatal mistake. So the first step of memorizing something, memorization, would be encoding, and then we need to move to storage. Mm-hmm. So when the knowledge is kept in your noggin for, however long you need it to. So how do we store something? So this is where it gets pretty cool. This is where something that I've experienced a whole lot and never knew the term for it was. So the first thing that comes up for storage is sensory memory. And so the sensory memory is something that lasts less than a second from when the stimulus happened, whatever. So like if I'm speaking to someone and I don't realize I've made a mistake within 1 second, I'm not going to realize that I made the mistake.
Oh, okay.
Or like if I wasn't really paying attention to something my mom said, but if she asked me what did I just say, and it's been recent enough, like 1 or 2 seconds, I could be like, oh, you told me to take out the trash, even though I wasn't really listening to her when she said it.
Gotcha.
And I had no idea what a term for that was before, so I was really excited when I read that.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It happens with visual things, like if you see something, like a flash of something across the sky, and you're like, did that just happen? But yeah.
And that's called iconic.
Yep.
I've seen this before on MCAT before. I think this is a common thread.
Yes.
Visual is iconic, and auditory version of sensory memory is echoic.
Yes, exactly. And so a way that they test for iconic sensory memory is they'll flash up a thing of 9 letters, and then they'll like immediately take it away. If they ask like the patient or whoever's participating in the study to repeat all 9 letters, there's no way. They have no idea. But if they're told to repeat the middle line of 3 letters in the array of 3 by 3, then they're able to say exactly what it is every single time. Because even though they weren't effortfully putting in time to like commit it to memory, it was within 1 second. And that's all it takes for sensory memory to be there.
Yeah.
So, and they were asked to think about it directly after, so they know what it is.
Yeah.
So after 1 second, the next time frame is basically 30 seconds. And I thought short-term memory, which is the 30-second one, was way longer than this.
Yeah.
Is that not incredible?
Yeah, well, it's when you work in the other forms of memory, I guess, that we realize, that our short-term vernacular, as we keep using that word today, strangely, is not entirely correct. And I think, actually, that brings up an important point, that us keep using the word vernacular is like a kind of response to the fact that we do misuse a lot of psychology terms.
Oh, yeah.
And that you can't just say like, oh, yeah, it's common sense kind of stuff. It's like, it might be common sense, but you're going to fail if you don't know these terms.
So I use short-term memory, like when I was explaining, that was my sensory, sensory memory.
You caught that.
Yep, but because it was within 1 second. But if I just kept talking, I wouldn't have been able to realize I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Which we do all the time, which I do all the time.
So you're explaining.
Yes, that. So if I was explaining Alzheimer's to somebody who had no idea what it was, I would say like, well, yeah, they probably keep their long-term memory, but they probably struggle with short-term memory. Mm-hmm. That might be true.
It is true.
But the way that I was using short-term memory,
yeah.
I totally wasn't using it for 30 seconds at a time.
Right.
I was using it for the whole day beforehand, or the couple of days, or within the past week.
Yeah. So
really maybe fluid versus crystallized or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure when we start to get into definitions.
But anyway, yeah. So the only other important thing with short-term memory is that it's way shorter than we think it is. It's like 30 seconds long. And then we can remember the general rule about this based on many, many experiments. Wow. Is that you can remember about 7 things plus or minus 2. It's called the 7 plus or minus 2 rule. for memorizing things within a 30-second span, but within your short-term memory.
Yeah.
And then working memory is super, super cool to me. It allows us to use facts we know and work with them. It's not really like between short-term and long-term. It's like they're in long-term already. We really know these facts. Like, I know that, oh goodness, I was going to use an example that I didn't know the answer of. So like 6 times 6 is 36. So I know that fact. And then I know that like 2 plus 2 is 4. So if I had to add those two things, I like know that one fact. I know the second one. If I add 36 and 4, I get 40. Mm-hmm. That was my working memory, allowing me to use things I know that are like totally in my brain.
Right.
And then work with them to get an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily between short-term and long-term. It's like pulling from long-term to do things.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is cool. Long-term memory. Oh, this is so cool. Okay, so things that make it to long-term memory have been tied to your already existing knowledge and are like cemented there. And one thing I did want to mention is that sensory, short-term, working, long-term, they all happen in the hippocampus. Mm-hmm. But what's important for long-term memory, I'm coming like way full circle, like 4 or 5 videos back here, is that some of the long-term memory that goes to the hippocampus also gets put into the cerebral cortex. It's like, as we've practiced it so many times, it no longer needs to be in the hippocampus. And it can go to the cerebral cortex. So when it does that, if anything happens, like a stroke or something, some damage happens to the hippocampus, those patients can still remember the names of their children and their spouse and what happened to them in childhood and all of those really concrete knowledge things that are stored in their cortex.
Yeah.
So I wonder, because Alzheimer's, like, it does affect so much of your long-term memory. Mm-hmm. Maybe not what happened in childhood and stuff, but long-term, even as in a week ago, is considered long-term.
Yeah.
If it was encoded, because it's not within a 30-second span. Anyway, but those patients often remember their kids' names, you were telling us. So I wonder if it's because though that bits of information has been encoded so well and stored so well that some of it's stored up in the cerebral cortex. It's like the attic of the brain.
Yeah, it absolutely could. So, implicit versus explicit.
Yeah.
For long-term memory.
Yep. So implicit would be skills and conditioned responses. Skills like driving a car that are just... I would probably use the word intrinsic because I use it way too much for things that it doesn't necessarily mean. But yeah, so they're not going anywhere.
So implicit meaning like you do not have to actively try to remember those skills or those memories.
Procedural. You just do the thing. You know how to do the thing.
It's like, this is a car, therefore all of like your brain, your subconscious almost is saying like, this is a car, therefore do this kind of stuff. And you pay attention, but it's not like you're actively calling back to remember.
It's not effortful processing.
It's not effortful processing.
It's just automatic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then explicit declarative meaning I have to say something, asks me to recall. It's conscious recall of facts. And so there's 2 different examples of explicit memory. Facts we know that have meaning for us, semantic memory, and then episodic memory, our experiences.
Yeah.
Like the one time, like my nanny was alive when World War II ended, and she remembers running downstairs, her mom being so excited to run downstairs when the news broke out that the war was over, that she put her shoes on the wrong feet, and so Nani's feet hurt really bad. And so that's an episodic memory for her. That's an experience that will never go away.
Okay, yeah.
So, retrieval is the process of demonstrating something that's been learned and retained. It is the 3rd step. So now we're almost to the end, towards the end of this video. So encoding, and then storage, and then retrieving that thing that we learned.
Yes.
And so this was what we were talking about earlier. So semantic networks and spreading activation. So I have seen the little cartoon that says that men store information in these little file boxes, and they open up the file box, use what they need, put it back up, and go on their little merry ways. And then I've seen the cartoon for the woman's brain that's like, it's like Spaghetti Junction.
Which, for everyone who does not live near Atlanta, is just a big old jumbled mess of highway.
Yeah, and so things are getting all sorts of connected and convoluted and all sorts of that. But all of our brains actually work that way. And so we don't store information in those file boxes. We use an interconnected web of ideas, which I think is great, a great way of thinking about it, because I think it's actually true. When we remember something near the target fact that we're actively trying to remember, like, oh, what's that person's birthday? Then you remember, oh wait, it was December because it was really cold outside and I had a big bulky jacket on. And oh wait, there was Christmas decorations up at the house, so it must be, oh wait, it's the 26th. It was right after Christmas.
Okay.
So it kind of works like that. So so priming is the use of something near that target fact. So I think to get the person to remember something.
Okay, yeah. That's you were talking earlier about the FBI and how they'll prime you. They'll say, like, what were you doing here? It says that you were at this place or blah blah blah, and then just to get them to, oh yeah, now I remember.
Yeah. So if like a witness can't remember a specific detail, they might try to work with them and be like, let's see if we can probe something and see if something does actually come up and you can recall it.
Yeah.
And so spreading activation is that thing that, like, if one thing lights up, you're activating all the things around it. So it's easier to recall that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that totally makes sense for how I think about things. That's some of your aha moments on the test when you remember something. You're like, oh, finally got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So recall would be the retrieval and statement of something. Like if I had to say, oh, his birthday is December 26th, I had to say it out loud as declarative.
Yes.
Recognition would be just picking something out of a lineup. So quite literally, like, do you recognize who did this crime, who robbed your house? And then you have a lineup of 5 guys. Like, it's easier than recall because I don't have to, like, make a picture for the sketch artist from nothing. I can be like, oh, it was totally that guy. Guy number 3. And then relearning, which I think is the most important and most applicable for us as MCAT students, is that the second time you learn, encode a piece of information, you pick up on it way quicker. And
that's why I was talking about how I always go through videos, I go through recordings of lectures, and I'll almost do it knowing, like, I won't pay too much attention to it. I'll just hear it a couple times, and if I've heard it a couple times, then I could probably say afterwards, like, yeah, that happens. But even if I don't know it that well, it doesn't bother me because I think I've just naturally done this, that I know, yeah, I'm going to do it later. And then when I learn it that next time, I'm going to remember everything from all of those things that I heard.
Yep.
And it's going to be way easier for me to learn.
When I hear videos like that, I don't ever encode that information, so I can't learn that way.
Okay.
But I know that about myself. So,
yes.
So it was really good that I've taken psychology before, because now that I'm relearning it a second time, I think it is easier. I remember this, and this, and can tie it together, and just like you were saying with videos. But the guy who really worked on this was a guy named Ebbinghaus. I hope I'm saying that right. And you may know him from the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. We'll get to that in one second.
Yeah.
But he determined that spacing things out, the longer you space out the act of learning and relearning, that longer time actually you have a relearning event that's stronger and better, which I think is awesome. So if we're doing MCAT stuff, then cramming is not even at all an option, right? There's absolutely no way it'll work because there's just so many subjects on here, and it's stuff that we've been talking all day. It's something that we'll have to study for a month here, and then study something else for a couple of months, and then come back to that first one and kind of do it in cycles like that.
That's why a lot of people will say when you're studying the MCAT, don't do like one chapter of one thing and then go to a completely unrelated chapter of another thing. They'll say, like, knock out all of biology, then knock out all of orgo, then knock out all of biochem, and then knock out all of gen chem, then physics, then psychology, like do all of it at once and then wait a while, then come back to it to review it.
Exactly. And that goes back to that rehearsal stuff. You got to rehearse it a couple of times where it's not going to be in there when you go to retrieve it. So, retrieval cues. So we have different things that help us retrieve information once it's up in our storage, once it's literally in the attic of our brains. Context effects. So someone will remember information better when they are in the physical place where they learned it. So they've done studies where they've taught 2 classes, and they had one take the test in the room where they were hearing their lectures, and then they would teach the same class to a different group of students, both randomly selected. And then they would have that group of students go take the test in an unfamiliar place. And the students who did better were the students who tested in the same room where they learned the information.
Okay.
And so that might tie right into what some of your parents might have told you in high school and middle school and all that. Like, if you're wearing a specific kind of lotion while you study, if you wear it on test day, you'll remember it better. It even goes so far as if you're intoxicated when you learn something, then remembering that thing later while you're intoxicated will be easier.
Get hammered before your test.
Sure.
My parents actually always told me to study at a desk.
So that when you take it, yeah.
Don't study in your bed. Don't study at the kitchen table. Study at a desk.
Yep. And so that I thought was really interesting, the way that we have just decided we're going to do it. Studying the MCAT in a happy way, like making this fun, letting yourself get fascinated by things that you're learning. Because when you learn it in a happy way and then you go into the test with a happy affect, then you're going to do better.
And I've said this ever since organic chemistry, that when I took organic chemistry for the first time, I only took it once. When I took organic chemistry, I realized, like, okay, this is hard. So I got to get a good grade in it. What do I need to do? I need to, like, make it fun. I need to not see it as, and I have a buddy who went through it and did not get a great grade, because every time that I would show up to class, 2 hours early because I had some free time, and I would just sit at the chalkboard and just go through examples as much as I could, and I would start to, like, get really excited when I got it right, or I would I would show my professor, like, what I learned, because he was a phenomenal guy. But he would also, like, he would come in and, like, just kind of, quiz me on some stuff before class. But it became, like, a fun thing. And I've talked to a couple other people who, when they started taking the upper level chemistries, upper level biologies, we all had a very similar view, which was, it kind of, like, it becomes your life. It's your social. That's why a lot of your friends tend to be people going through the same thing, because that's how you socialize, is by doing all of these different, just by studying basically, and having fun. Like, that is your fun. And I think that's a big part of med school too.
Yeah.
Like, seeing the actual coursework as fun, because you have a ton. There's so much stuff thrown at you, so much information, that the only way that you can get through it is just by studying a lot. And the way to stay sane through that is make it fun.
So that being said, always study with margaritas.
Exactly. And then go into the MCAT with, like, a Camelback, and then promise them it's just water.
Okay. So we might get in trouble for that one.
Nah, just the people who do it.
There you go. The serial position effect, I know you will basically, at least on one of your practice tests, see something about this, and that is literally what it sounds like. In a series of numbers or words or whatever, you tend to remember things at the very front and the very back better than anything the mush that's in the middle.
Yep.
And so primacy, the first few words, or recency, the last couple words, those things are separate in and of themselves, but serial position effect includes both of them. And now we get to talk about forgetting, because even long-term memory is not permanent.
Yes.
Which is not how we think about long-term memory. We think once we get it there, we're good.
Yeah.
But that's where that whole, like, teaching yourself in the car while you're driving, rehearsing, making sure you really know that stuff comes in.
Yeah, and if it just becomes a tool for you to then, apply to something like the MCAT. So
I am going to quit just speaking for hours and hours and hours at you guys. I think it's been 8 hours now. And I'm going to turn it over to the dementia expert, Tal.
Yes. Okay, so, it says aging in memory dysfunctions. Great example. Everyone's going to be able to relate to, pretty much immediately, because it's such a popular thing, Alzheimer's. So it is a type of dementia. It's a progressive dementia. You don't just get to one state normally, and you continue to lose cognitive function. I will say it is reversible. It has been done before, but it's typically seen as, like, a disease of aging, and that it just keeps on going. So the retrograde amnesia, which you've written here as one of the notes, is a great way of talking about why people think that they don't have good short-term memory. It's not short-term memory by the strict definition, but rather it's that you forget that you lose new memories because things from your past are... Wait, retrograde amnesia. I'm starting to lose it.
So this is lesson in psychology number dose. That's really important. So we need to know that we can define things. Well, I guess it really still goes under that first very important rule of psychology, that a lot of things that sound similar are very, very distinct. So retrograde and anterograde amnesia are completely different ideas than retrograde and prograde interference.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's where I was messing up.
Yep, and a lot of people do, and I did when I was first reviewing this stuff too.
Okay, so explain retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia to me.
Right. So retrograde amnesia, you've forgotten memories from your past. Retro, like the 80s. And then anterograde, you're unable to form new memories ahead of you. So anterior ahead, AA.
Yes. So yeah, I mean that's basic. I don't have much more to talk about it. I guess that just that we've mentioned this before, that these type of memory dysfunctions, a lot of which we classify as dementia. Dementia itself is an umbrella term talking about different ways that you can get to that point that affect your ability to form memories, to remember old things, which I guess remembering old things, retrograde amnesia, remembering new things, anterograde amnesia. And that it can come from multiple sources.
Okay, so maybe like the explanation that I always talked about with Alzheimer's is, having trouble with short-term memory is not true. They just had anterograde amnesia.
Anterograde, yes. It's not necessarily short-term memory. It is anterograde amnesia.
Okay, so the next one that was an example is Korsakoff syndrome with a thiamine deficiency. And it causes both forms of amnesia?
Yeah. I don't know too much about it. I know it is a form of dementia. That is a thiamine deficiency. And it has been tested before on an MCAT practice, something that I've done.
Okay.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. The really interesting thing with this one is that people who have this disease, because they do lack so much of their memory, so much of really their cognitive function as far as memory goes is not there, that they do a process called confabulation. It kind of is what it sounds like. You're creating fibs. It kind of sounds like that, confabulation, creating false memories to fill the gaps in your brain, and that's a really sad side effect.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the exact same definition that exists within Alzheimer's, but I know that when my grandparents were in the later stages of Alzheimer's, they would either agree to anything you said about their past. Like I could tell my grandmother. My grandmother she was a secretary at a telephone company for most of her life. She worked as a lunch lady at Princeton for a while, but she never did what. Sometimes we would say like, we would quiz her basically to see like where are you in the progression. My dad's a doctor. I'm interested in Alzheimer's, so we would try to figure out like what is the state of your memory right now. And we would quiz her little things, and then we would put little lies in, like, do you remember doing this? And she'd say, oh, yeah. And then she would even, like, say, like, of course, and we did this too, and blah, blah, blah. And you realize that you're just going along with it. I don't know if that's exactly confabulation, because it's not an active, like, this thing happened, let me tell you about it. It's more of an agreeance, because you can't remember.
Well, if she elaborated, then maybe.
It could be,
because what goes along with confabulation is having a really, like, detailed recall of this memory that wasn't there.
Yeah.
So if she expanded on it, then that sounds like it might be an example.
Yeah.
And agnosia, the loss of ability to recognize objects, people, or sounds, normally just one of those at a time, from physical damage to the brain or like the brain tissue, like a stroke or multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
Have you heard this word before? Because I don't know it.
I have not heard this word before, but I definitely have heard this symptom before.
Did we do a passage on people who couldn't recognize other people?
Yes, we did.
Was it agnosia? I don't know how to say that.
I think that it was the question, like once you learned the answer at the end, the question was actually asking you about experimental design.
Well, yeah.
Because there was the one person.
Right.
And you had to determine at the end that they were just lying based on a lot of things, not that they were suffering from agnosia.
Okay.
That they didn't recognize faces.
That was what they were testing though, right?
I think so, yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. I'm going to have to rehearse that definition because I've never heard it before. So if I don't pay enough attention to it, it'll just flow through the cracks. And then when I'm on the MCAT and I've got a question on it, I'm going to be like, hey, brain, what's the answer? And they'll be like, oh, I totally remember that word. Right. What's it mean?
So
I don't know.
So loss of the ability to recognize objects, people, or sounds.
Yep.
Okay. Recognize objects, people, or sounds.
Yep. So we already talked about perspective memory a little bit earlier, and so that's like a task you need to do. And so we talked about for the elderly, if they walk by a grocery store, they're typically pretty good about remembering, oh, I don't have milk at home, I need to grab milk. But if it's as far as like time-based, task-based, like I need to take my medicine at 7 p.m., it's harder for them to do so. So that prospective memory does decrease with age.
Yeah. And
then finally, decay. Naturally losing things that we just don't think about for a very long time. So the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting is actually why you should listen to your teachers when they tell you to go over your notes when you get home that day from school, because within 9 hours there's an exponential loss of information you learned that day.
Yeah.
And then from, one day on, there's basically kind of a leveling off, more like, 6 to 8 days. It'll be there kind of in the back of your mind. Eventually, you'll probably forget it in total if you never need to recall it again. But yeah, recall drops rapidly after we learn something within a day, exponentially within 9 hours. So if you go to a lecture in the morning, within 9 hours, if you don't flip over your notes or something, you could totally lose something before a test if you don't have a chance to go back and read your notes.
Yep. Wish that was something that I had learned earlier on.
I do as well. So now we get to talk about the thing that's kind of confusing. So on my notes it says interference, and then after that it says, and there's a flag 15 yards to the goal. And oops, not that kind of interference. Can you tell I was studying with my dad this morning?
I love the jokes that you built into your notes.
I'm a 5-year-old. I'm sorry. I can't help it.
And then you told us it was a joke.
Well, I'm also wearing a Finding Nemo shirt, if that tells you guys anything.
And I'm picking on you. And speaking of being 5 years old, we're about to talk about a very non-5-year-old little mnemonic.
Oh, yeah. Let's get into interference. And so as I was typing these notes out this morning, I was kind of turning my computer away from my parents, who were having breakfast right beside me, because the mnemonic for remembering the types of interference is porn. P-O-R-N.
I'll remember that one.
Yep. So interference means when one set of information gets in the way of you memorizing a new set.
Not to be confused with amnesia, which was happening to me 5 minutes ago.
Yep. Retrograde and anterograde.
Yes.
Yeah. And so proactive interference, so P-O, and porn starts with P-O. So proactive is where the old information gets in the way of the new. That's like when you get a new phone number and it's really hard to remember the new phone number because you just remember your old one.
So proactive, old, P-O.
Yep. And then retroactive, new. So new information gets in the way of old. Like once you have really learned your new locker combination, if people still use that in high schools, I don't know. It's almost impossible if you remember your old one.
Yeah. So. Retroactive, new, RN, P-O-R-N. Yep. I remember we had a really good question on this on a practice test one time where they were talking about an experiment where they were trying to determine, I think it was soldiers coming back, if they had retroactive or proactive interference. And they said, what would be the best study to determine this? And they gave you a bunch of different examples. And the one that I think was the correct answer was just have them memorize one set of numbers, then another set of numbers, and then after a certain amount of time, ask them to repeat them.
Yeah,
and if they could repeat the first one, then that means that they would have proactive interference, because old information gets in the way of new, right? Proactive, old.
Yes.
So they could remember the first set, but if they had retroactive interference, they'd be able to remember the second set, but not the first set.
Yeah, so Todd brings up a really good point. It takes all of 5 seconds to go through that little exercise in your head. So if you have to write out your mnemonic on the little thing that, well, I don't know, they
in
do.
Huge bold letters, just write porn, people.
But if you have to maybe like write it down really in small letters if you're using this mnemonic.
Or tall letters.
Oh, goodness. But it takes 5 seconds to think about if this happens then this, if this happens then this. If it's going to help you get the right answer, do it.
Yeah.
Check it a second time if you get the time. So anyway, and then we are almost done with this. So everyone hang in there. We are almost there. Memory construction and source monitoring. So this is something I've never been conscious of before, I think. But so memory construction is actually incredibly faulty. Just like when they bring 2 witnesses to a trial and they can both tell the story in 2 completely separate ways. So if they're not emotionally subjectively tied to the people in the case and they just are like 2 bystanders that witnessed this thing happen, because of their own subjective emotional states, they could tell the story in 2 separate ways.
Yeah.
Even without bias. And so the next thing, source monitoring, is quite literally like keeping an eye on where you got your sources from. So if you're like telling someone a new fact and you want to explain where you got it from, a source monitoring error would be confusion, basically where you got it from. And so you might say the wrong source or something. So you're trying to keep up with it, but you got it wrong. And then source amnesia is something that my dad does all the time. He tries to give me these really deep, wise lectures, and he's a very wise man. But he's terrible about keeping up with who he got the story from. So he'll be like, I heard somebody say, and like immediately undercut his argument because he can't remember who told him the thing.
Interesting.
So source amnesia, you weren't trying, but you just totally don't remember who you got it from. You could even be telling the same, like with jokes, you could be telling the same joke to the person who told you the joke because you just don't remember who told you the joke.
Yes. I'm a victim of that.
I am as well. I think it's easy to do.
Especially if it's a great joke.
Yeah. Yeah. So like my interference joke, right? Right?
Right.
Elbow.
She wrote elbow down there too, everybody.
No, I didn't.
She did.
I wrote wink earlier though. False, and I didn't.
That was good.
Yeah.
Good job.
Are you proud of me? Okay. False memory is exactly what it sounds like. And it can be created by confabulation, which we talked about earlier with Korsakoff's disease, where they're just lacking so much of their long-term memory that they make up really detailed new false memories to fill in the gaps. So that's a false memory. Or the misinformation effect, which is that there was a bunch of studies done in psychology previously where they would show people videos of a crash, and then they would ask the 2 different groups. They would ask one group, how fast were the cars going when they crashed? And then they would ask the other group, how fast were the cars going when they collided? And then based on the words that were used in the question stem, the misinformation from those question stems would affect how the people answered the question. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons that we created the IRB board, the International Research Board, especially for things like survey experience. They would be
like polling or
studies,
census studies, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So if it's a survey, then there needs to be 0 bias and biases or whatever in the questions, and so you have to run it by that board and get it approved before you go and do that.
Yeah.
And then I think one other important thing to mention really quickly is that you can't use the word experiment if you're doing something with people. It's just a study, because there's a really bad connotation for doing experiments with people. Yeah. So that's one of the lessons that I just kind of remembered from my long-term memory from when I took that psychology class way back in the day. Yeah. So the very last set of bullet points for this video, I promise, is changes in synaptic connections, underlie memory, and learning. And so it's really, really exciting. So one thing I want to mention is that we do have all of the neurons that we're ever going to need and even more when we're born. And so it's up to us to decide what we're going to do with them. And as your dad said, it's the first part of our lives, and even in utero, it's not up to us. But as young adults and adults, it is. And so neuroplasticity is the literal connections of the neurons, basically creating pathways in your brain. And so how I remember this is plastic is a polymer. And so if you're polymerizing something, you're connecting different molecules. And so neuroplasticity, connecting neuronal pathways. And so the child's brain is so plastic that for children with like really bad epilepsy, they can take out an entire hemisphere of the brain, and the one hemisphere that they have remaining will take over all of the regular function, and they are totally fine.
Oh my gosh, I never knew that.
Yeah, it's incredible. So when someone says like, oh, you're doing such and such, that's dangerous because you're killing brain cells. Well, you might be, and it might not be great for you, but you have all you ever need when you're born.
Yeah.
And actually, to counter their point, we do this thing called synaptic pruning that Tal and I were talking about the other day, where we literally get rid of the ones that aren't working great as we get older, and we just strengthen the ones that are already there. It's like natural selections for neuronal connections. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. And so back to the plasticity, especially with children, it's one of the reasons that they can learn languages so much better than we can as adults. They have a much more plastic brain. They're much more able to create different synaptic connections, and that is a really big thing in language. And so, plasticity and learning and memory. So plasticity, forming those connections is the exact reason we can revisit a fact or behavior later. So the more we use a specific pathway, the more we rehearse one specific fact, or behavior, even like for Olympic figure skaters or whatever, the more they do that set of whatever's in their routine, whatever you call that, the set of dance moves or whatever on the ice that they do and all the impressive spins and jumps, the more they do that, the neurons important for the motor pathway that allows them to do it gets stronger. So the more rehearsal they do, the easier it is for that neural pathway to fire. And so their learned behavior becomes easier to do.
Wow.
Yeah. And we can actually we can make changes with so we know that like the influx of sodium is what's important for neuronal signaling between neurons, but we can increase calcium channels on the postsynaptic neuron and increase a learned behavior a learned fact by increasing the amount and how quickly we depolarize.
You make the response stronger in those specific pathways.
So that's kind of like artificially practicing and rehearsing information or a behavior.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Long-term potentiation, the very last thing, and we actually already mentioned it, is the neuron pathway we just talked about. So it's
stronger with the more we use it. Yep. Exactly what you just said.
So when our parents told us that we could, work out our brain like a muscle, they weren't wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna do something unprecedented here.
Huh.
That was the strongest hour of content review I have ever heard in my life. And I want to pass this torch over to you to send us off on this video.
Oh, thank you, Tal. Well, you know what? I think we did strong work, gang.